You think you understand the cosmos. You have been taught, by textbooks, by teachers, by the very air of modern scientific culture, that the solar system runs like a great clock, wound once at creation, ticking eternally forward, planets tracing their ordained circles through the void, each body knowing its place, the whole magnificent apparatus requiring no further attention from its maker. You are wrong, not partially wrong, not wrong about the details, wrong about the fundamental picture. The clockwork universe is a myth, and here is what should disturb you. This myth is attributed to the very philosopher whose mathematics first described the invisible chains binding planet to sun and moon to earth. The man credited with proving the cosmos is a perfect machine actually believed the opposite. His calculations revealed not a system of serene perpetual motion, but a cosmos teetering perpetually on the edge of catastrophe. Let that settle for a moment. The founder of gravitational theory believed the solar system was fundamentally unstable. Consider what this means. Every sunrise you have witnessed, every season that has turned in its appointed course, every generation that has lived and died beneath the same familiar heavens, all of this exists not because the celestial machine runs itself, but because something prevents it from flying apart. The question that must seize any thinking mind is simply this: what is that something? Let us begin with the clock, that marvelous instrument that seems to run itself once wound. You have seen them in great houses, in church towers, in the workshops of skilled craftsmen. The pendulum swings, the gears turn, the hands advance with mathematical precision. But does the clock run forever? It does not. Every clockmaker knows this. The pendulum's swing diminishes. The gears accumulate friction. The spring loses tension. The mechanism drifts. What was perfectly synchronized on Monday has lost seconds by Friday. A clock, no matter how exquisitely crafted, requires maintenance. It requires the clockmaker to return, to adjust, to correct, to wind. This is not a flaw in any particular clock. This is the nature of clocks. Now, raise your eyes to the heavens. What makes you certain the cosmic clock is different? What grounds have you for believing that the solar system, unlike every mechanical device ever constructed, runs perfectly forever without attention? The answer, if you examine it honestly, is nothing. No grounds at all. You believe it because you have been told it. You believe it because the myth has been repeated so often it has hardened into assumption. But the mathematics tells a different story. The error most make is confusing description with explanation. When natural philosophy provides equations that describe planetary motion with exquisite accuracy, predicting eclipses to the minute, calculating the return of comets to the day, we conclude that we have explained the cosmos. We have done nothing of the sort. We have described it. We have written down regularities in mathematical form, but an equation describing how something moves does not explain why it continues to exist. A formula predicting where a planet will be does not guarantee the planet will persist to arrive there. This confusion lies at the heart of the clockwork myth. Because the heavens can be described mathematically, we assume they are self-sustaining. But description is not explanation. A physician may describe the circulation of the blood with perfect accuracy, the chambers of the heart, the vessels, the rhythm, without explaining why blood exists or why the heart began beating. The description is complete as description. As explanation, it is silent. So too with celestial mechanics. The equations describe how bodies move, given that they exist. They do not tell us why they continue to exist. What then did the mathematics actually reveal when the problem was first calculated in full. Something disturbing. The equations of gravitation, when applied honestly to the actual solar system, not the simplified picture of textbooks, but the real arrangement of multiple planets attracting one another mutually, predict eventual catastrophe. Not stability, not eternal order, catastrophe. When Jupiter pulls on Saturn, and Saturn pulls on Jupiter, and both pull on Earth, and Earth on them, and every body feels the combined attractions of every other massive body in the system. These influences accumulate. They do not cancel. They compound. Over centuries and millennia, they add perturbation upon perturbation until the orderly system begins to unravel. This is not speculation. This is mathematics. The same mathematics that predicts eclipses with such precision predicts, over sufficient time, that the solar system should tear itself apart. And yet it has not. The solar system persists. The planets return, age after age, to nearly the same positions. The heavens that watched over ancient civilizations watch over us still. How can this be? The mathematics predicts instability. Observation reveals apparent stability. Something is missing from our account. The popular image of the clockwork universe serves modern purposes well. It justifies treating nature as autonomous, self-explaining, requiring no reference to anything beyond itself. It is a convenient picture for those who wish to close the cosmos off from questions of purpose or providence. But it is a fiction imposed backward onto history. The philosopher whose name is most attached to this picture, whose mathematics made it seem plausible, explicitly rejected it. He believed, on the basis of his own calculations, that the solar system required continuous divine maintenance to persist. He wrote of God not as a distant watchmaker who wound the clock and walked away, but as an active governor who maintains what physics alone cannot maintain. The myth inverts the truth, and believing the myth blinds us to evidence written into the very mathematics used to describe the heavens. You thought the cosmos ran itself. You thought the machine was perfect. You were wrong. And being wrong about this, discovering that the clockwork image is a myth, is the first step toward understanding what is actually happening in the heavens above you. Simple question. Place a planet around a sun. One planet, one sun. Nothing else. What path does the planet trace? The mathematics yields an elegant answer. An ellipse. A closed curve, perfectly predictable, traced and retraced forever. The same path the planet followed yesterday, it will follow tomorrow, and 1,000 years hence. This is the two-body problem, and it has been solved. The orbit is eternal. Now add a second planet. Everything changes. The moment you introduce a third body, a second planet orbiting the same sun, the mathematics becomes fundamentally different. Not harder in the same way, different in kind. With two bodies, the equations can be solved exactly. There exists a closed-form solution, a formula you can write down that tells you where each body will be at any time, past or future, with perfect precision. The system is completely predictable, determinism in its purest form. With three bodies, this is no longer possible. The equations admit no general solution. The paths cannot be written down in closed form. Small differences in initial conditions, differences so tiny they fall below any possible measurement, grow into large differences in outcome. The system becomes, in the language of natural philosophy, indeterminate. This is not a failure of our instruments or our diligence. It is built into the mathematics itself. The three-body problem has no general solution because the structure of gravitational interaction among three mutually attracting masses does not permit one. And if 3 bodies already transcend our mathematical powers, what of 6? What of 12? What of the countless bodies that populate the true heavens? Here is what most people never learn. When multiple bodies attract one another mutually, the perturbations do not cancel out. Consider what happens. Jupiter pulls on Saturn. This pull is small compared to the Sun's attraction, perhaps 1 part in 1,000, but it is not zero. It deflects Saturn slightly from the path it would otherwise follow. Next year, the deflection is slightly different because the relative positions have changed. The year after, different again. The naive assumption is that these perturbations, being sometimes in one direction and sometimes in another, should average out to nothing over time. The positive deflections should cancel the negative ones, leaving the orbit essentially unchanged in the long run. They do not. Think of a ledger with many entries, some credits, some debits. You might hope they balance. But what if each year's entries depend on last year's balance? What if the errors compound rather than cancel? Small discrepancies in the early pages become large by the middle of the book, and by the end, the account cannot be balanced at all. This is the solar system. Each perturbation depends on the positions produced by previous perturbations. The errors compound. The sum grows. What begins as imperceptible wobble becomes, across deep time, catastrophic departure from the orderly paths we observe today. Let us make this tangible. Consider a wall built slightly off true. At the foundation, the deviation is imperceptible, a fraction of an inch, invisible to the eye. But as the wall rises, the lean accumulates. By the time you reach 100 feet, the deviation is visible to anyone. The same small error per foot of height, compounded through all those feet, produces a wall that threatens to topple. Or consider a wheel with a tiny imbalance, a slight asymmetry in its mass. At walking pace, you notice nothing. The rotation is smooth, the imbalance irrelevant. Spin it faster. Now you feel a vibration. Faster still, and the vibration becomes shaking. At sufficient speed, the wheel tears itself apart. Time is the multiplier that converts small perturbations into large instabilities. For the wall, it is height. For the wheel, it is speed. For the solar system, it is duration. The time scale is millions of years rather than months, but the principle is identical. Small accumulated errors do not vanish. They grow. Now here is the calculation that should shake your confidence in the eternal heavens. Run the mathematics forward in time, accounting honestly for the mutual perturbations of Jupiter on Saturn, Saturn on Jupiter, both on Mars, all on Earth, and the cascading effects as each deflection produces further deflections. And you find that the errors grow without bound. Orbits drift. Resonances build. Given sufficient time, planets should be flung from the system altogether, or sent crashing into the sun, or set upon collision courses with one another. The mathematics predicts that the solar system should destroy itself, not might. Should. The instability is not a possibility to be worried about, but an inevitability to be explained away. The calculations do not permit eternal stability. They demand eventual catastrophe. And yet the solar system has endured for billions of years. The catastrophe has not come. The mathematics predicts chaos. Observation reveals order. This is the paradox. Imagine you could watch the solar system for 1,000,000 years, sped up so centuries pass in seconds. What would you see? Not the orderly parade of textbook diagrams, planets gliding smoothly along fixed elliptical tracks like beads on celestial wires. You would see wobbles and drifts. You would see orbits slowly migrating, their shapes subtly changing. You would see resonances building as planets slip in and out of gravitational synchronization. You would see a system in slow-motion crisis, perpetually on the edge of catastrophe. The appearance of stability we observe in the night sky is a snapshot, a single frame from a film that, viewed in its entirety, tells a story of precarious persistence rather than mechanical perfection. If the mathematics predicts chaos and observation reveals order, then one of two things must be true. Either the mathematics is wrong, or something stabilizes the system that the mathematics does not describe. But the mathematics is not wrong. It has been verified with exquisite precision. Halley's Comet returns when predicted. Eclipses occur to the minute. The motions of the moons of Jupiter follow gravitational equations with such accuracy that they were once used to determine longitude at sea. Every test of gravitational theory has confirmed its predictions within the limits of measurement. The mathematics is not wrong. Something else must be at work. Something holds the planets in their courses against the chaos their mutual attractions would otherwise produce. What is that something? We have reached the boundary where physics ends and a deeper question begins. You have now seen the paradox clearly. The mathematics of gravitation, applied to the actual solar system, predicts instability and eventual catastrophe. Yet, the system persists. It has persisted for billions of years, far longer than the timescales over which perturbations should have produced chaos. What explains this? The answer proposed 3 centuries ago by the very philosopher who first formulated the mathematics revealing the problem is breathtaking in its simplicity and audacious in its implications. God intervenes. This is not metaphor. This is not poetry. This is the explicit, stated position. The Creator periodically corrects the planetary orbits when perturbations have displaced them too far from their proper courses. The solar system is not a perpetual motion machine requiring no attention. It is a system that drifts toward failure and is continuously maintained. The universe requires divine maintenance. Mark what this means. The most elegant mathematical description of nature ever devised, the system of mechanics and gravitation that explains falling apples and orbiting planets with the same simple laws, this very system, when applied honestly to the actual solar system, points beyond itself. The mathematics describes the mechanism of motion. It does not explain why the mechanism continues to operate. It predicts instability. The observation of stability points to something the mathematics cannot contain. Physics, pursued to its end, points beyond physics. Consider the difference between describing and explaining. A physician may describe the circulation of the blood with perfect accuracy. The heart contracts, blood is forced through the arteries, it returns through the veins, the cycle repeats. The description is complete. Every observation confirms it. The measurements are precise. But has the physician explained why blood exists? Why the heart began beating? Why circulation continues from moment to moment? The description tells us how the system operates, given that it operates. It does not tell us why it operates at all, or why it continues to operate rather than suddenly ceasing. So too with celestial mechanics. The equations of gravitation describe how bodies move, given that they exist and that gravity operates. They predict where Jupiter will be next year with extraordinary accuracy. But they do not explain why Jupiter exists, why gravity operates, or why the system persists despite its mathematical tendency toward chaos. Description is not explanation. To confuse them is to commit the fundamental error that makes the clockwork myth seem plausible. Now consider the clockwork metaphor more carefully. The deist's claim is that God created the universe like a clockmaker, creating a clock, designed it perfectly, wound it, set it running, and departed. The cosmos runs itself thereafter, requiring no further attention. But this is not how clocks work. Real clocks drift. Real clocks slow. Real clocks require maintenance. The pendulum must be adjusted. The mechanism must be cleaned. The spring must be wound. A clock left truly alone will eventually stop. Its gears will accumulate dust and friction. Its rhythm will falter and fail. The clockwork metaphor, properly understood, defeats rather than supports the deist position. If the universe is like a clock, then like a clock, it requires the continued attention of its maker. The metaphor points toward continuous governance, not perpetual autonomy. This understanding, that the cosmos is sustained rather than self-sustaining, was explicit in the original formulation of gravitational theory. It appeared not as an afterthought or a concession to religious sentiment, but as a conclusion drawn from the mathematics itself. The heavens declare not the glory of a perfect machine, but the glory of continuous providence. The stability of the planets is not a given to be assumed, but a gift to be wondered at. The persistence of the cosmos is not the operation of an autonomous mechanism, but evidence of governing power. The error of modern thought is to take this governing power for granted, to treat stability as the natural state of things and chaos as the intrusion. The mathematics suggests exactly the opposite. Chaos is the natural tendency. Stability is the maintained achievement. You may resist this conclusion. You have been trained to resist it. The modern mind treats "God did it" as a conversation stopper, a failure of inquiry, an admission of ignorance dressed up as explanation. When we cannot explain something naturally, we invoke the supernatural, and this is thought to be intellectual cowardice. But consider what has actually happened here. The inquiry has not stopped. It has been pursued to its end. The mathematics has been calculated. The perturbations have been traced. The predictions have been made. And the result of all this rigorous investigation is not a gap in knowledge, but a positive conclusion. The system should fail, and does not. The persistence of the cosmos demands explanation beyond the cosmos. This is not filling ignorance with deity. This is following evidence where it leads. The mathematics does not merely permit the theological conclusion, it invites it. Physics itself points beyond physics. To refuse this conclusion is not intellectual rigor, it is intellectual cowardice, a refusal to follow the argument where it goes because one dislikes the destination. What, then, is the cosmos? It is not a closed system running down by its own internal dynamics. It is not a perfect machine requiring no attention. It is not autonomous. It is an open system, maintained moment by moment, a dependent order sustained by continuous governance, a creation that points perpetually beyond itself to what creates it. The instability of the heavens, far from being an embarrassment to faith, becomes its vindication. The mathematics reveals what might otherwise be hidden, that existence is not self-grounding, that persistence is not automatic, that the cosmos requires and receives sustaining power. We have resolved the paradox. The system persists because it is sustained. But this resolution opens deeper questions. If the cosmos depends, what are the mechanics of that dependence? What evidence can we observe? What does governance look like from within the governed system? The instability we have been discussing is not an abstract mathematical curiosity confined to equations on paper. It is an observable reality. The perturbations that should accumulate toward chaos are happening right now, and with sufficient care, you can see their effects. Look up on a clear night and find Jupiter and Saturn, the two giants of the solar system. What you are watching is a wrestling match that has troubled astronomers for centuries. Through the telescope, Jupiter and Saturn appear as stately wanderers, tracing their unhurried paths among the fixed stars. But precise measurement reveals what casual observation misses. Their orbits are not fixed. They are drifting. Jupiter, over the course of centuries, is accelerating, its orbital period shortening slightly. Saturn, correspondingly, is decelerating, its orbital period lengthening. These changes are small enough to escape ordinary notice, but large enough to be measured with careful instruments and accumulated records. The giants are wrestling. Each deflects the other's path through gravitational attraction. Each year's deflection depends on the positions produced by last year's deflection. The effects compound. What you see in the night sky is not a static arrangement, but a dynamic interaction. The stability is not a frozen state, but a sustained balance. The giants are not sliding on fixed tracks. They are influencing each other with every orbit, their gravitational embrace producing perturbations that accumulate over time. Here is what the records show. Over the past several centuries, Jupiter's orbital period has shortened by a measurable amount, small but detectable. Saturn's period has lengthened correspondingly. This is not a one-time adjustment, but an ongoing drift. The trend continues. Now project this drift forward. If Jupiter continues accelerating and Saturn continues decelerating, what happens over millions of years? Their orbits migrate. Their resonances shift. The careful spacing that currently permits stability changes. The cascade effects, Jupiter's influence on Mars, Saturn's influence on the outer reaches, all change accordingly. The mathematics suggests that given sufficient time, this drift should become catastrophic. The giants that now orbit in relatively stable configuration should eventually enter resonances that amplify rather than dampen perturbations. The wrestling match should end in mutual destruction or ejection. And yet, it has not. The system has persisted for billions of years through conditions that should have produced this outcome long ago. The perturbations do not stay between Jupiter and Saturn. When Saturn's orbit shifts, its gravitational influence on Mars changes. When Jupiter's orbit shifts, its effect on the asteroid belt changes. These secondary effects produce tertiary effects. The inner planets feel the ripples of the giants' wrestling match. Earth is not exempt. The same perturbations that threaten the stability of Jupiter and Saturn propagate inward to affect our own planet's orbit. The familiar succession of seasons, summer to autumn to winter to spring, depends on orbital parameters that are themselves subject to slow variation driven by gravitational influences throughout the system. The stability we experience is not local, it is system-wide, and system-wide stability is precisely what the mathematics says should not persist. Consider a thought experiment. Imagine Jupiter suddenly vanished, not destroyed, simply removed from the calculation. What would happen to Saturn? Its orbit would change. Without Jupiter's gravitational tugging, Saturn would trace a path much closer to the perfect ellipse of the two-body problem. Its orbit would become more regular, more stable, less subject to drift. Now restore Jupiter. The perturbations resume. The orbit begins drifting again. The instability returns. The chaos is not a property of Saturn alone or Jupiter alone. It is a property of their relationship, of the mutual gravitational influence that binds them together in their celestial wrestling match. Now multiply this by every pair of planets in the system, every gravitational coupling, every mutual influence. The web of interactions is so complex that no general solution exists. The system is irreducibly complicated, and complicated systems of mutually influencing bodies tend toward chaos, not toward order. The error most make is assuming that because the perturbations are small, they are negligible. Consider a small leak in a ship's hull. A trickle of water enters with each wave. The leak is small, perhaps a cup per hour. Negligible, surely. But the voyage is long. Days pass. Weeks. The trickle accumulates. What was a cup becomes a gallon. What was a gallon becomes a flood. The ship that seemed perfectly seaworthy at departure finds itself sinking by journey's end. Smallness is not the same as negligibility. The leak is small. Its accumulated effect is not. So too with gravitational perturbations. The annual effect of Jupiter on Saturn is small, a tiny fraction of Saturn's orbital motion. But the effect accumulates year after year, century after century, millennium after millennium. What is imperceptible in a human lifetime becomes significant over thousands of years and potentially catastrophic over millions. The solar system is a ship with a small leak. The question is not whether it will eventually matter, but why it has not already mattered. Why the ship has been sailing for billions of years without sinking. When you next observe Jupiter and Saturn in the night sky, you are watching something far more dramatic than it appears. You are watching an ancient contest in slow motion. You are seeing perturbations accumulate in real time. Perturbations that the mathematics says should eventually destroy the orderly system you observe. You are witnessing instability actively occurring. The positions of those two giants tonight differ slightly from where pure two-body mathematics would place them. The discrepancy is small, but real. It is the signature of mutual perturbation. It is evidence that the instability is not merely theoretical, but actual. The giants are wrestling. The system is drifting, and yet it persists. Why? We have now established the problem with full clarity. The solar system is mathematically unstable. Gravitational perturbations among the planets accumulate rather than cancel. The calculations predict that over sufficient time far shorter than the actual age of the solar system, the accumulated perturbations should produce catastrophic departures from stable orbits. Yet the solar system has persisted for billions of years. The catastrophe has not come. The mathematics predicts failure. History records persistence. Something maintains what physics alone cannot maintain. What is that something? Some seek the answer in the particular arrangement of the solar system. Perhaps they suggest the planets happen to be spaced in ways that minimize perturbation effects. Perhaps the orbital resonances happen to be stable ones rather than unstable ones. Perhaps the masses, distances, and inclinations fall within a narrow window that permits long-term persistence. There is truth in this. The solar system's configuration does permit greater stability than many alternatives would. If the planets were arranged differently, if Jupiter were closer or Saturn more massive, or the orbital periods fell into certain integer ratios, the instability would be more severe. But this observation does not resolve the question. It deepens it. Why are the planets arranged this way? Why does the solar system fall within the narrow window of configurations that permit persistence? Why these masses and not others? Why these distances and not others? Why these orbital inclinations? The observation that the system is arranged so as to permit stability simply pushes the question back. Who or what did the arranging? Consider what is being claimed when someone says the solar system is stable because its configuration happens to permit stability. It is like saying a clock keeps time because its gears happen to be arranged so as to produce timekeeping. True, but it invites the obvious question: who arranged the gears? The natural philosopher can describe the conditions that permit stability. What natural philosophy cannot do is explain why those conditions obtain. Description is not explanation. The arrangement is a fact. The fact requires a cause. The planets could have been arranged otherwise. That they are arranged as they are, in a configuration that permits persistence against mathematical tendencies toward chaos, is itself a phenomenon demanding explanation. And the explanation cannot be found within the arrangement itself, any more than the explanation for a clock's timekeeping can be found within the gears. Here is the deeper point. If the system truly drifts toward instability, if the mathematics correctly predicts that perturbations accumulate over time, then the persistence of the system implies correction, not merely a fortunate initial arrangement, but ongoing maintenance. A clock arranged ever so carefully at the moment of construction will still drift and fail without the clockmaker's continued attention. The gears may be perfectly cut, the pendulum perfectly weighted, the spring perfectly tensioned, but time and friction will undo the perfection. Eventually, correction is required. So too with the solar system. Even if the initial arrangement were optimal for stability, the mathematics shows that the system drifts. The perturbations accumulate, the drift compounds. The arrangement that permitted stability at the beginning would cease to permit it eventually, unless correction occurs. The persistence of the solar system through billions of years is not explained by initial arrangement alone. It points toward ongoing maintenance, continuous governance, the hand of the watchmaker returning to adjust what time and mutual perturbation have disturbed. We cannot observe divine intervention directly. No telescope will show us the moment of correction. No instrument will measure the adjustment. But we can observe what such intervention would produce, a system that mathematics says should have failed, persisting nonetheless. This is the situation we find. The evidence does not compel belief. Nothing compels a mind determined to resist. But it invites inference. The mathematics predicts instability. Observation reveals stability. The simplest explanation is that something maintains the system against its mathematical tendency toward chaos. To see this as God of the gaps reasoning is to misunderstand what is happening. We are not filling ignorance with deity. We have pursued the mathematics to its conclusion. We have observed the phenomena. We have identified the paradox. The conclusion that the system is maintained is not a stopgap, but a rational inference from evidence. Notice how the question transforms when we take this seriously. Instead of asking, how does the clockwork run itself? A question with no good answer because the clockwork does not run itself. We ask, what sustains the system? Instead of assuming stability is the natural state and chaos is the intrusion, we recognize that chaos is the mathematical expectation and stability is the achievement. Instead of treating persistence as self-evident, we treat it as remarkable, a fact demanding explanation, a gift requiring acknowledgement. The solar system has not failed because it is maintained. The cosmos persists because it is sustained. What appears to run by itself runs only because someone or something is running it. This is the resolution to the paradox. But it is not the end of inquiry. It is the beginning of a deeper understanding. If the cosmos is sustained, what does that mean for how we understand nature, law, and existence itself? If everything depends, what does dependence look like? The individual insight about planetary mechanics opens onto a unified vision of reality. The scattered pieces begin to reveal their pattern. We have traced the instability of the solar system to its mathematical roots, we have seen that the cosmos persists not because it is self-sustaining, but because it is sustained. The particular arrangement of planets permits stability. Continuous governance maintains it. But now a deeper question emerges. If the solar system requires maintenance, what of the rest of creation? What of the laws themselves? The very principles by which gravity operates, by which motion continues, by which the cosmos holds together. Are they too contingent? Do they too require explanation beyond themselves? The answer will extend the insight about planetary mechanics into a vision of existence itself. Consider the inverse square law. The force of gravity diminishes with the square of the distance. Double the distance between two bodies. The gravitational attraction falls to 1/4. Triple the distance, it falls to 1/9. This proportion holds with exquisite precision throughout the observable cosmos. But why the square? Why not the cube? If gravity diminished with the cube of distance, the force would fall to 1/8 at double the distance, 1/27 at triple. The mathematics is equally coherent. The equations would balance. A universe could be constructed on such a law. Why not the simple inverse? Gravity falling merely in proportion to distance. Half the distance, double the force. Again, mathematically possible. Again, coherent as a system. There is nothing in logic that demands the square. The inverse square relation is not a truth of reason, deducible from first principles. It is a fact discovered through observation. And what is discovered might have been different. This point is crucial and often missed. The laws of nature are empirical, not logical. They are learned from observation, not derived from pure reason. When we drop an object and it falls, we do not deduce that it must fall from any necessary truth. We observe that it does fall, and we formulate laws describing how it falls. But the observation comes first. The law is the description of the regularity, not its cause, whence it follows that the laws of nature are contingent. They might have been otherwise. They require explanation beyond themselves. The inverse square law does not make gravity operate. It describes how gravity operates. The law is not a power. It is a pattern, and patterns require something to produce them. Trace any chain of natural explanation far enough, and you reach a terminus. Why does the apple fall? Because of gravity. Why does gravity operate? Because mass attracts mass. Why does mass attract mass? Here, physics falls silent. You may propose deeper explanations. Mass curves. Space. Space tells matter how to move. Very well. But why does mass curve space? Why does space tell matter how to move? Each explanation rests on another regularity, and that regularity, too, is contingent. The chain does not extend forever. At some point, we reach brute fact, regularities that simply are, without further explanation, available within physics. The inverse square law is not explained by physics. It is assumed by physics. It is the foundation upon which calculations rest, not a conclusion those calculations produce. And foundations require explanation. A building does not explain its own foundation. The foundation explains why the building stands. But what explains the foundation? Consider the constants of nature, the gravitational constant, that number which, when multiplied by the masses and divided by the square of the distance, yields the gravitational force. Why does it have the value it does? A slightly different value would produce a slightly different cosmos. A much different value would produce a cosmos in which stars could not form, or planets could not hold atmospheres, or life could not emerge. Why this value and not another? The question cannot be answered from within physics. The constant is measured, not derived. It is discovered, not deduced. It is a fact about reality that might have been otherwise. The same holds for every constant. The speed of light, the ratios that govern the structure of matter, the strengths of the various forces that bind atoms together. Each is measured. Each is contingent. Each might have been different. Why are they as they are? Here is what this means for our understanding of the cosmos. If the solar system depends on continuous maintenance, and the laws themselves are contingent rather than necessary, and the constants are given rather than deduced, then existence is not self-grounding. The cosmos does not explain itself. It points beyond itself at every level. This is not dependence only at the astronomical scale, requiring occasional divine adjustment of planetary orbits. This is dependence all the way down, through the laws, through the constants, through the very fabric of existence. Everything that is might not have been. Everything that continues might cease. Everything that operates does so by regularities that are themselves unexplained within the system they govern. The cosmos is suspended over nothing, unless something beyond the cosmos holds it in being. When you drop an object and it falls, you witness not merely a physical event, but a metaphysical mystery. Why does gravity operate now, in this moment, in this way? The law describes the regularity. It does not explain why there is regularity to describe. The constant measures the strength. It does not explain why there is strength to measure. Every falling object is evidence of sustaining power. Every sunrise is evidence of continued permission. Every heartbeat, every breath, every moment of continued existence is testimony to dependence we rarely notice because we rarely think to question it. The insight about planetary instability opens a window onto existence itself. The solar system is not uniquely dependent, it is paradigmatically dependent. It shows, in a form we can calculate and observe, what is true of everything. Nothing sustains itself. The error most make is treating the laws of nature as if they were self-enforcing. We imagine that gravity is a power in the world, compelling objects to fall. We imagine that the laws of motion are forces, pushing and pulling matter through space. We imagine that nature runs by its own inherent authority, the laws governing like legislators with power to compel. But this is confusion. A law is not a power. It is a pattern. The law of gravity describes how objects fall. It does not make them fall. The laws of motion describe how objects respond to forces. They do not produce forces. The pattern describes what happens. It does not cause what happens. To confuse description with causation is to commit the fundamental error that makes naturalism seem plausible. Once you see that laws are descriptions rather than powers, you see that the regularities they describe require something to produce them, something the laws themselves cannot name. We have extended the insight. Dependence is not limited to the solar system's stability. It pervades all of nature. The laws are contingent. The constants are given. Existence is not self-grounding, but sustained. The particular revelation about celestial mechanics becomes a window onto the nature of being itself. What we learned about planetary perturbations applies, in principle, to everything that is. Nothing exists by its own power. Nothing persists by its own inertia. Nothing sustains itself. If this is true, if existence is genuinely dependent, then what is the relationship between the sustainer and the sustained? Between physics and what lies beyond physics? Between the patterns and the patterner? There is a question you have been trained to ask, and it is the wrong question. The question is, science or faith? Which one is true? The assumption behind the question is that science and faith are competitors, seeking to occupy the same territory, offering rival explanations for the same phenomena. If science explains how the cosmos works, faith is rendered unnecessary. If faith claims to explain origins and purposes, science is threatened. This assumption is false, and understanding why it is false transforms how we see both science and the cosmos it studies. Consider what science actually does. Science observes regularities in nature. It measures them, describes them, formulates them mathematically. It produces equations that predict where planets will be, how light will bend, what chemicals will form when others combine. Science is in the business of patterns, identifying them, quantifying them, using them to anticipate future observations. This is an enormous achievement. The precision of scientific prediction, the power of scientific technology, the elegance of scientific theory all testify to the success of this enterprise. But notice what science does not do. Science does not explain why there are regularities to observe. It does not explain why the patterns hold. It does not explain why the universe exists rather than nothing, why it persists rather than ceasing, why it follows mathematical law rather than behaving chaotically. These questions are not answered by science because they cannot be asked within science. They are presupposed by science. Science proceeds by assuming that nature is regular, that patterns persist, that tomorrow's observations will follow the same laws as today's. These assumptions are the foundation upon which scientific inquiry rests. But what explains the foundation? Now consider what faith actually does. Faith, in its mature form, does not offer rival explanations for phenomena that science already explains. Faith does not say, planets move because God pushes them, in competition with gravitational theory. Faith does not deny that regular patterns exist or that mathematics can describe them. Faith recognizes what science presupposes but cannot explain. Faith sees the regularities that science describes and asks, by what power do these regularities hold? Faith observes the patterns that science measures and asks, who or what patterns the patterns? Faith acknowledges the laws that science formulates and asks, what sustains the law's authority from moment to moment? Faith is not an alternative to science. Faith is a recognition that the scientific account, however complete as description, is incomplete as explanation. It points to what lies beyond the patterns, to the patterner whom the patterns cannot name, but without whom there would be no patterns to describe. Consider a prism separating white light into its constituent colours. The natural philosopher describes this phenomenon with precision. Light enters the prism. It bends at the first surface. The different colours bend by different amounts because they travel at different speeds through the glass. They emerge separated into the familiar spectrum: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet. The mathematics is exact. The angles can be calculated. The prediction matches observation. As a description of what happens, the account is complete. But has the phenomenon been explained? Why is light composed of these colours? Why do they travel at different speeds through glass? Why does the relationship between speed and direction take this particular mathematical form? The description is complete as description. As explanation, it points beyond itself. The natural philosopher has told us how light behaves. The question of why light exists, why it has this nature, why these regularities hold, these remain open. Faith does not contradict the description. Faith receives it and recognizes in it a trace of something the description cannot capture. The regularity of light is a regularity. Regularities point to a source of regularity. The patterns are patterns. Patterns point to a patterner. Here is the key. Science and faith are not competitors because they answer different questions about the same reality. Science asks, how? By what mechanism? In what pattern? With what mathematical precision? Faith asks, why? To what end? By what power? Sustained by whom? These questions do not compete. They complement. A complete understanding requires both. Science without faith becomes blind mechanism, regularities without meaning, patterns without purpose, a cosmos that simply is, for no reason and toward no end. Such a picture may be coherent, but it is impoverished. It refuses to ask the deepest questions. Faith without science becomes untethered speculation, purpose without precision, meaning without measure, claims about reality that cannot be tested or refined. Such faith may be comforting, but it is irresponsible. It refuses to look carefully at what actually is. The collaboration of science and faith produces something neither achieves alone, a vision of the cosmos that is both precisely described and meaningfully understood. If God sustains the cosmos moment by moment, if existence is genuinely dependent rather than self-grounding, then the regularities science discovers are descriptions of how God consistently acts. This is not a God of the gaps, who fills ignorance with mystery. This is a recognition that the regularities themselves, the very patterns science relies upon, are evidence of sustaining power. The laws of nature are, on this view, the habits of God, the consistent ways in which divine action maintains the cosmos. When you discover a new regularity in nature, you are not pushing God further away. You are learning more about how God acts. Every scientific advance reveals another facet of the sustaining power that holds all things in being. This is why the greatest natural philosophers saw no conflict between their science and their faith. They understood that to study nature is to study the work of the Creator. The more precisely we describe the patterns, the more fully we appreciate the patterner. There is a unity to truth. There cannot be two truths, one scientific, one theological, that contradict each other. If they seem to conflict, one or both has been misunderstood. This does not mean science must bow to dogma, abandoning observation for authority. It means that genuine discoveries about nature and genuine insights about the divine must ultimately cohere. Reality is one. Our accounts of it must harmonize. When scientific observation appears to conflict with theological conviction, the task is not to abandon one for the other, but to examine both more carefully. Perhaps the scientific account has been overextended, claims made beyond what observation supports. Perhaps the theological conviction has been misformulated, doctrine asserted without sufficient humility. In either case, deeper inquiry resolves the apparent conflict. The collaboration of science and faith is not peaceful coexistence, but active dialogue. Each corrects and refines the other. Each opens questions the other cannot ask. Together, they approach truth. Neither reaches alone. What, then, is the proper posture? It is not to choose between science and faith, as though one must abandon either precise observation or ultimate meaning. It is to embrace both, recognizing their distinct contributions and their mutual dependence. Study nature with all the rigor science demands. Measure precisely. Calculate exactly. Test predictions against observations. Accept no claim that evidence contradicts. And also recognize what this rigorous study reveals. A cosmos of astonishing regularity, of mathematical elegance, of patterns that persist through deep time and vast space. Recognize that these patterns point beyond themselves. Receive them not merely as facts to be catalogued, but as traces of something facts cannot capture. This is the unified vision toward which the journey has been leading. The instability of the solar system pointed to dependence. Dependence extended to the laws and constants. Laws and constants, as descriptions pointed to what they describe. And what they describe, regularity, pattern, mathematical order, points to a patterner whom science cannot name but cannot avoid implying. The cosmos is contingent, sustained, and intelligible. It invites both investigation and wonder. Everything we have discussed may seem distant: celestial mechanics, mathematical instability, the contingency of physical laws. These are matters for astronomers and philosophers, you might think, not for ordinary life. But the truth we have uncovered is not distant. It is immediate. It is closer to you than your next breath, because the cosmos is not the only system that depends on maintenance. Your life does too. And once you learn to see dependence, you see it everywhere. Consider the morning light. You have seen countless sunrises. The horizon brightens. The disk appears. The day begins. Mechanical, automatic, requiring no attention. The earth rotates. The sun appears. What could be more ordinary? But now you know something you did not know before. The Earth's rotation is an orbit, a path through space governed by gravitational interactions with every other body in the solar system. That orbit is stable only because the system permits stability, and the system is mathematically unstable. It should drift toward chaos. It persists because it is maintained. The sunrise you witness is not merely the mechanical consequence of rotation. It is permission granted, maintenance performed, the renewal of conditions that might not have continued but did. The light falling on your face is evidence of governance you never noticed. Every sunrise is testimony to sustained order in a cosmos that should be chaotic. Now extend this recognition to everything around you. The ground beneath your feet seems solid, permanent, guaranteed. But the ground is part of the Earth, and the Earth is part of the solar system, and the solar system is held in precarious balance against mathematical tendencies toward catastrophe. The stability of the ground is not a given, it is a gift. The air you breathe continues to have the composition that supports your life. The water you drink continues to flow in patterns that make civilization possible. The seasons continue to turn in their appointed courses. None of this is automatic. All of it is maintained. You take these things for granted. Consider what that phrase means. Take for granted. To take something for granted is to receive it as given, as guaranteed, as requiring no gratitude, as owing nothing to any source. But nothing is given in that way. Nothing is guaranteed. Everything is granted, permitted, maintained, sustained. Consider now the patterns closer to home. Your body continues to function. Heart beating, lungs breathing, blood circulating. Every physician will tell you these processes are automatic, self-regulating, requiring no conscious attention. And so they seem. But automatic means regular. And regularity is precisely what we have learned to see differently. Why does the heart continue to beat? Why does the biochemistry continue to operate according to its intricate patterns? The medical account describes how these things work. It doesn't explain why they continue to work from moment to moment rather than suddenly ceasing. The body doesn't sustain itself in any ultimate sense. It depends on food, water, air, external inputs it cannot provide for itself. But more fundamentally, it depends on the regularities of nature continuing to hold. If the laws of chemistry changed overnight, the body would fail. If the constants shifted, the careful balances that permit life would collapse. Your continued existence in this moment depends on the continued operation of regularities you did not create and cannot control. Extend the recognition further still. Your household, your work, your relationships all require maintenance to persist. A garden left untended returns to wilderness. The weeds encroach, the flowers wilt, the structure dissolves. This is not mysterious. It is the natural tendency of all things left alone. Order decays without attention. A skill unpracticed atrophies. The musician who neglects the instrument finds fingers stiff and awkward. The scholar who abandons study finds knowledge fading. Mastery is not achieved once and kept forever. It is maintained through continuous practice. A relationship unnourished withers. Love is not a state entered and preserved automatically. It is a dynamic balance maintained through attention, care, repeated acts of commitment. Neglect produces distance, and distance produces dissolution. In every domain of life, you find the same principle. Persistence requires attention. What appears to run by itself runs only because someone or something is running it. The cosmos models for you, in its grandest structures, the truth that governs your smallest affairs. The instability of the solar system, the mathematical tendency toward chaos that is continually corrected, is the same pattern writ large that you observe in your garden, your skills, your relationships, your body. Nothing maintains itself. Everything that persists does so through maintenance. The chaos is the default. The order is the achievement. When you begin to see this, the ordinary world transforms. The stable ground is not automatic. It is evidence of cosmic maintenance. The rising sun is not guaranteed. It is permission renewed. The beating heart is not self-sustaining. It participates in regularities held in being from beyond. What seemed given appears as gift. What seemed automatic appears as sustained. What required no gratitude now demands it. There is a practical consequence to this transformed perception. If nothing maintains itself, then maintenance is not optional. It is the price of persistence. Neglect is not neutral. It is the first step toward dissolution. The garden you have been meaning to tend it. The skill you have been meaning to practice it. The relationship you have been meaning to nourish it. They will not maintain themselves. They will not wait forever. The chaos is the default. Your attention is required. And when circumstances spiral beyond your control, when perturbations accumulate, when order seems to decay despite your efforts, you need not despair. You are not witnessing the breakdown of a perfect system. You are witnessing what systems do when left to themselves. The question is not, why is this falling apart? The question is, what maintained it until now, and can that maintenance continue? Sometimes the answer is your own effort, redoubled and redirected. Sometimes the answer points beyond your effort to sustaining power greater than your own. Consider what the cosmos teaches. The solar system should have destroyed itself long ago. The mathematics is clear, and yet it persists. The persistence is not explained by the system's internal resources. The mathematics says those resources are insufficient. The persistence points beyond the system, to something that maintains what the system cannot maintain for itself. Perhaps there is a lesson here for your own life. Perhaps the situations that should have defeated you but did not. The chaos that should have overwhelmed you but somehow did not. Perhaps these too are evidence of maintenance you did not notice. Perhaps you have been sustained by more than you knew. We have come a long way from the simple question with which we began. You thought the cosmos was a perfect machine. You thought the solar system ran itself, wound at creation and ticking eternally forward. without attention. You thought stability was the natural state of things and chaos the intrusion. You were wrong. But being wrong about this has opened something far more profound than being right ever could. Return now to the night sky, the same heavens you have observed all your life, the planets in their courses, the stars in their places, the moon tracing its eternal path around the earth. You have seen this sky 1,000 times, but tonight you see it differently. You know now what you did not know before. The orderly paths are not eternal ellipses traced automatically through the void. They are dynamic balances, continually maintained. The stability is not a given, but an achievement. The mathematics that describes these motions also predicts their eventual failure, a failure that has not come because something prevents it. The heavens you observe are not a clockwork running itself. They are a sustained creation. The instability is real, written into the very equations that describe the motions, and so is the persistence, written into history, into the billions of years the solar system has endured against its own mathematical tendencies. This is not the clockwork universe. This is the sustained cosmos. The instability of the heavens need not terrify you. Consider what it reveals. A perfectly self-sustaining universe would be a universe that does not need God, autonomous, independent, self-law. Such a cosmos would declare nothing but itself. Its existence would be its own explanation. Its persistence would require no gratitude. But the actual universe is not autonomous, it is dependent. The mathematics reveals a system that should fail. Observation reveals a system that persists. The gap between prediction and reality points to something physics cannot name: sustaining power, continuous governance, the hand that holds. The instability is not a flaw in creation. It is the signature of ongoing relationship. It is the evidence, written into mathematics itself, that the cosmos is not alone, that it is held in being by something beyond itself. Where does this leave us? Not in fear, not in anxiety that the heavens might collapse tomorrow. If the solar system has been sustained for billions of years, the sustaining power is reliable. The hand that has held does not tremble, but also not in complacency, not in the false security that imagines stability is automatic, that takes the cosmos for granted, that lives as though dependence were not real. We are left in wonder at a cosmos so vast and so orderly that we can describe it mathematically. Wonder at a mathematics so powerful that it reveals the system's own instability. Wonder at an instability so systematically overcome that billions of years pass without the predicted catastrophe. Wonder at the hand that holds what would otherwise fall. There is a posture appropriate to this wonder. It is not mastery. We do not command the heavens. We do not sustain the cosmos. We are not the source of the regularities that permit our existence. It is not anxiety. The cosmos has persisted through challenges far greater than any we can imagine. The sustaining power has proved itself reliable across deep time. Whatever maintains the solar system against its mathematical tendencies is not failing. The appropriate posture is trust, not trust in the system's self-sufficiency. We have seen that the system is not self-sufficient. Trust in what sustains the system. Trust in the hand that holds. This is a deeper security than autonomy could ever provide. Autonomy means standing alone, dependent on nothing, vulnerable to whatever might disrupt our own resources. Trust means being held, dependent, yes, but dependent on something far greater than ourselves, something that has already proved itself through the long ages of cosmic history. Before the vast mystery of existence, We remain as children on a seashore. Why is there something rather than nothing? Why does order persist rather than chaos? Why do regularities hold rather than dissolving? These questions can be asked but not answered from within the cosmos. They point beyond. They gesture toward what we cannot see directly, but can infer from what we do see. We have found some pebbles on this seashore, mathematical descriptions of how things work, observations of what persists, inferences about what maintains the persistence. These are not nothing. They are genuine understanding, hard-won and precious. But the ocean stretches infinite before us. The deepest questions remain open. The mystery is not dispelled by what we have learned. It is illuminated, and that is as it should be. A mystery understood completely would be no mystery at all. A cosmos fully explained would be a cosmos reduced to our own comprehension, small enough to fit inside a human mind. The actual cosmos exceeds us. The actual mystery transcends us. This is not frustration. This is glory. We began with a question. Why is the universe unstable? We have found an answer. Because it is not self-sustaining. Because physics, pursued to its conclusion, points beyond physics. Because the mathematics describes a system that should fail, and the persistence of the system implies something the mathematics cannot capture. But the answer has transformed into something larger than the question. We have learned that the cosmos is contingent, that the laws themselves are empirical rather than logical, that the constants are given rather than necessary, that existence does not explain itself. We have learned that science and faith are not competitors but collaborators, that science describes the patterns and faith recognizes the patterner, that neither is complete without the other. We have learned that dependence pervades not only the heavens but our daily lives, that nothing maintains itself, that persistence requires attention, that the chaos is the default and order is the achievement. And we have learned to see the cosmos with new eyes, not as clockwork running itself, but as creation sustained, not as given, but as gift, not as autonomous, but as held. Go out tonight, if the sky is clear, and look up. Find Jupiter if you can, or Saturn, the giants whose wrestling match we have traced. Watch them trace their slow paths among the stars. Know that you are watching a contest that should have ended long ago in catastrophe, a dance that mathematics says should have dissolved into chaos. And yet, there they are. There they have been for billions of years. There they will be, maintained, sustained, held. The instability is real. The mathematics does not lie. And yet the persistence is real too. The heavens that watched over ancient civilizations watch over you still. You understand something now that you did not understand before. The universe is unstable, and that instability is the signature of the hand that holds it. What you thought was a machine is a sustained creation. What you thought was automatic is continuously permitted. What you thought was given is gift, and the gift is given, moment by moment, by the hand that holds all things in being. The cosmos does not run itself, it is run. And you who watch the heavens, who breathe the air, who walk upon the ground, you too are held, not by your own power, not by automatic mechanism, by something that has sustained you thus far, and if it wills, will sustain you still. The universe is unstable. You are held nonetheless. That is the final word. That is the wonder. That is enough.